Thank you, Piggy, and thank you, birthday boy. And happy birthday. If I were to ask you how many of you could quote Matthew 7:12, how many of you would tell me you could quote it? That's, is that 1.5? 2? Okay, 2. What if I told you that the golden rule was Matthew 7:12? How many of you could quote Matthew 7:12? Okay, that's a little better, I suppose. One of the more famous statements that Jesus made is this one. And I suspect that a lot of people who could actually quote it don't have any idea whatsoever that it came from him. And as a result, it's interesting to think about. When I do a lesson, I always try to think, after I've put it together, is there anything in that lesson that you guys haven't heard 1,000 times? And, or is there any application that maybe you haven't thought of? And when I put this one together and thought about it, I thought, you know, I don't know. I don't know, we'll have to see. So if anything strikes you that you've not heard before, or the context you've not heard, when you leave, tell me that. I'd like to know that. All right, so here's where we are. Matthew 7:12, we refer to it as the golden rule. Commonly, people say it this way: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. How many of you, that's the way that you would quote that if I asked you to do it? Several of you, and some of you are going, nah. If you look at this the way it's commonly stated and compare it to the way it appears in the New King James Version, therefore, whatever you want men to do to you, do also to them, for this is the law and the prophets. And what's interesting is, that last phrase, for this is the law and prophets, hardly anybody remembers to put that in when they quote this verse. And as we're going to see, that turns out to be fairly significant. Why is it called the golden rule? I think because we all would believe that if everybody practiced this, it would make our world better in almost every way. Now, I've actually given thought to saying, okay, in 2026, what I'm going to do is I'm going to preach every Sunday from the Sermon on the Mount. I believe you could do that. I believe that you could get some fantastic lessons over the course of 50 Sundays or so, right out of the Sermon on the Mount. And when you work through the Sermon on the Mount and you attempt to make applications of what Jesus said, this portion of the sermon, I would say, is rich. And you're going to see why in just a couple of minutes. Just think, if the golden rule was applied universally, how different our world, our nation, our community would be. 7:12 has been referred to by some as the summary statement of the Sermon on the Mount. And that from this point and going on in the sermon, Jesus essentially begins to tell his listeners it's time to make a choice. You're going to do this stuff or not? You're going to follow this or not? You're going to accept this or not? And like a lot of the Sermon on the Mount, even in this particular instance, Jesus teaches something that we would provide as a high standard. We talk about setting the bar. You've heard that some people are out of their depth in parking lot puddles. This is setting a high bar for them to meet. Okay? And it's such that if the average person could set this as a standard for their life, there would be a lot of things that would have to change. Now, first off, we refer to it as the golden rule. There's nothing that says this is a rule. How many of you have rules that you live by? Some of you aren't sure. Of course you have rules that you live by. And interestingly, even with as much as all of us, I'd say, were alike and think alike and have our lives very much alike, I would say that if we were to ask everybody to give the rules you live by, we'd get a very different list from one person to the next. And so what I want us to think about is the rules that you live by, if you have some, Which are they closest to? Is it like the iron rule? Might makes right. Some have said that the golden rule ought to be he who has the gold rules. The iron rule is that the person who makes might has what's right. The bronze rule stated, do unto others as they have done to you. And they pull from the text the passage of the eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. The notion there is that under the bronze rule, it's all about getting even. Now, those are not really good rules to live by, those two. And then we have the silver rule. Do not unto others what you do not want them to do to you. Now think about the way that's worded. That is a passive rule. Don't do to them what you don't want them to do to you. And then we have the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. It's not passive. It is active. Do to them what you want. Some have even suggested that there is a platinum rule. The platinum rule, do unto others according to what they want you to do to them. I would suggest to you that's a flawed rule. What if, well, let me give you an example. Parents, how many of you had children that liked candy and cookies? Okay? So if you ask the kid what they want, and the answer is always candy or cookies, the platinum rule says, what? Give them candy and cookies. Why would we not do that? Because we know that's not good for them. It's not in their best interest. And so the platinum rule, even though it sounds good, is really not a good rule to live by. Now, some say that Jesus borrowed this statement, the golden rule. But the typical application of the rule is often aligned most closely with the one that we described as the silver rule. And the model of the silver rule essentially is, don't do bad things to other people. Confucius, in his writings, what you do not want done to yourself, do not do to others. And then the Jewish, from the Talmud, from which we get much of the Hebrew text, what is hated to you, do not do to your neighbor. And then from the Apocrypha, the book of Tobit, and what you hate, do not do to anyone. And so there is this sort of common refrain in other places, other forms of religion or other things that talk about moral things, that the silver rule has some merit to it. But all of that is not the rule that Jesus had, nor did he take his rule from these, unless he decided to look at something like that and say, oh, I can improve that. And that's what he turns out to do. The rule is superior to any of those. It is a positive rule. It's to go about having a second mile philosophy. What would I do if I were in their shoes? How would I want to be treated in that situation? And then go about trying to do that. It is an active, positive, that takes things to a higher level of understanding. It is saying, look, I want you to treat others the way that you want them to treat you. There are no stipulations here. Just go and do it. Just treat them the way you want them to treat you. It's fairly simple. And there are no stipulations. This is about how we ought to treat other people. Notice, regardless of how they treat you. Jen had on the sign out in front something recently that said, what did it say? Do good to others. What?
Always love your neighbor.
Always love your neighbor.
No exceptions.
No exceptions. Okay? That is the way that we are supposed to be. It's a fairly simple concept that we are expected to do that. Now, let's see if we can make application of this part of the Sermon on the Mount. Did you notice that when we read it, that Jesus started this verse with the word therefore? And you know what that means. In fact, Tom pointed this out not terribly long in the last month on a Sunday morning Bible class. At the beginning, when it says therefore, that means everything I've just told you, take that into account, and now, therefore, in the New American Standard Version, it says, in everything. And so what had he just talked about? Okay, now remember, we're in Matthew 7. And what he's just talked about in the Sermon on the Mount, he started out talking about the Beatitudes. And we know about the Beatitudes. You know, and we should think about the fact that when we are told that there are things that we need to do, that is to start right, getting yourself with God in the right place, that would include the things that are in the Beatitudes. Hunger and thirst after righteousness. What does the golden rule have to do with telling you to hunger and thirst after righteousness? What about you should show mercy? What does being merciful have to do with the golden rule? Or that you're supposed to be peacemakers, or be pure in your heart? All those Beatitudes. What would the golden rule say about those Beatitudes? If we're supposed to have purity, or if impurity affects the way that we treat others, then the golden rule would dictate that we can't allow that to happen. And later then, in the Sermon on the Mount, he talks about salt and light. And we know what those mean. Your influence, right? What does the golden rule have to say about your influence? Or if we went a step further, he goes on in chapter 5 and he talks about that be angry and sin not. Don't murder. Don't let your anger turn in murder. Don't lust with the eyes. If you do, you've already committed adultery with your eyes. And he talks about the concept of divorce. How often are those all selfish actions? Remember when we talked about that unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes? What does the golden rule have to do? How does the golden rule apply to those kinds of concepts? It's not an accident that these follow Jesus' instructions on all of those. And then he goes on in chapter 5 and he says, look, you don't need all of these oaths and contracts. Learn how to be honest. Let your yea be yea and your nay, nay. What does that have to do with the golden rule? Or if you see a person who wants you to go with them a mile, go with them too. Or if they smite you on the right cheek, turn to them the other. What does that have to do with the golden rule? It does in practice. And how we treat our enemies. That's what Jen just told us we've had on our sign out there. And at the end of chapter 5, we see all of those concepts give way to the things that we will be actively engaged in. And we talked recently about that your righteousness needs to exceed the righteousness of the scribes and the Pharisees in these ways. In your charitable giving, in your prayers, in your fasting. Don't do these things to be seen. Do them as acts for the right reason. How does the golden rule apply to things like giving and prayers and fasting? And at the end of the chapter, he says, don't worry. Turn over all of your worries to God. If he takes care of the birds of the field, why do you think he can't take care of you? What father would not give good gifts to his children? How does that apply to the golden rule? It tells me that I should not spend all of my time internally worrying about everything. What I need to be thinking about is how I can help others to engage. And then we talked recently about chapter 7. And the first few verses about the way that we judge. The golden rule application there is very obvious. Ask and seek and knock and you will find. Do we appreciate what God... He says if you ask, if you seek, if you knock, it will be open, it will be delivered, it will be given. Do we appreciate what God does for us? Does God do for us what He would want us to do for Him. Is that the golden rule? Is that how it ought to apply? Now, let's think about what this says in these verses. The New American Standard, in everything. What does that mean? Everything. Nothing is excluded. It means that you're supposed to, whatever you do it all in the name of the Lord, and that you should treat people the way you want to be treated. Think about this. Heavy thought for a small word. The word in Greek here, translated do unto others, is what is referred to as a present tense imperative. Now, here's your Greek lesson for the day. Present tense imperative. It is an imperative. It's not a suggestion. It is a command. Do unto others is a command for us. It is something you are expected to do by God. And notice that it is in present tense, which means what? Do unto others. Do it right now. This isn't something you put off till you've got more money, you've got more time, and you've got more ailment. You're supposed to do this now. And it's not a one-time thing. Because it is present tense imperative, it is an ongoing expression about how we're supposed to live our life. It's an action statement. But then, I mentioned this earlier, for this is the law and the prophets. And what that statement is telling us, I had Caleb read from Matthew chapter 22. Jesus was asked, what is the greatest commandment? And he told them, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. The first is great, the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. And then after that, which we almost always, we could quote, after that, in verse 40, it says, on these commandments hang all the law and the prophets. Look at that. Love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love others as yourself. And do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And on these statements hang all the law and the prophets. And so what does that tell us? Well, love God, love others. What does that mean? Well, it means you care enough to sacrifice for them, to give to them, to allow them to access your very best, which is what agape is defined as. You've got to care enough to be able to demonstrate that you want to do to others like you want them to do unto you. Think about this. Philippians 2. In Philippians 2, do we really think about others the way that we should? Because in there, Jesus or Paul said that we should esteem others better or greater than ourselves. And after that, he said, this is exactly what Christ did when he died for you. Esteem others better than yourself. Why? Because Jesus would do that, and in fact, Jesus did that. How important is it? Or in Luke 10, if I had asked almost anybody in here to summarize the Good Samaritan, you could do that for me. What's kind of interesting about Luke 10 is that before we get to the story of verses 30 through 36, it says that he said to him, what is written in the law? What is your reading of it? He answered and said, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, your mind, and your strength, and as your neighbor as yourself. And he said to him, you have answered rightly, do this and you will live. But then the next statement is the one we can't let go of. But he wanted to justify himself and said to Jesus, who is my neighbor? And that's what gave rise to the Good Samaritan. You want to apply the golden rule into the parable of the Good Samaritan? Well, a man went from Jerusalem down to Jericho, and he falls among thieves, and they steal from him. There's your iron rule. And while the man is beaten and lying on the ground, it says on 2 occasions, a priest and a Levite came by. I don't know if they did anything. Maybe they waved at him. Maybe they said, "Be warmed and be filled," and went on by. I don't know. Silver rule. But then we have this person described as a Samaritan. We all know what the relationship was between Samaritan Jews. This man's laying on the ground, and the Samaritan says, "I'm going to help him." And he picks him up and puts him on his animal, takes him to the local inn there, and pays for him to be there, and tells the innkeeper, if we owe more than what I've paid you, when I come back by, I will pay you more. That's the golden rule. And when Jesus finished this, answering the question, who was my neighbor? He said, which of these did the right thing? And the man said, the Samaritan. He said, go and do likewise. Why? Because that was the golden rule in application. That's what was supposed to happen. Here's a couple of final applications. If I do someone wrong, would I want that person to come and let me know that? If I did something or said something, would I want them to do that? Would I ever, Wednesday night, you should have been here, would I ever spread gossip? We found out Wednesday night Terry Pruitt is a gossip. I didn't know that. Now I do. Would I ever spread, what is the golden rule? Who gets improved or helped when we spread gossip? If we're hungry, would we want somebody else to give us something to eat? If I was lost in sin and headed for hell, would I want somebody to lead me to Christ? If what I did was misunderstood, would I want them to come and ask me for clarification? Would I want them to give me the benefit of the doubt before making decisions about my character? The golden rule applies in every one of those. And if it were practiced, just think about the difference it would make in all of the aspects of our life, in all of the arenas that we operate in. Whether we're talking about at home, in our business dealings, in the communities that we live in, think about the difference it would make in government. They actually made decisions based upon what's right and good for other people, rather than what's right and good for me. And it can even be a driving factor in churches. If we try to do the right thing. Think about how you can have a church that understands each other and loves each other so much that I can poke fun of a comment that Terry made on Wednesday night and him not leave. You know, he knows that I love him. And it's okay that I get those pokes too, because we have the ability to practice the golden rule. And if the golden rule was the rule, is there anybody here who would deny it? Things would be so much better. Things would be so much better. I think there were at least 3 occasions this week where I drove past a panhandler. You know what I'm talking about. It seems to me, maybe it's my imagination, it seems to me like the number of those folks are growing in Columbia. And in talking to a former friend from the hospital auxiliary who is into services for the homeless all the way up to his neck, who told me what all they have found in trying to help that population. It's alarming. And every time I drive by one of them, I have the thought, have I done the right thing? And sometimes I stop, and I've actually gone back a couple of times because I just felt like It was something that we had to do. It was that Good Samaritan story. Practicing the golden rule. You do it in your house, in your family, at work, at school, across the fence. Lisa and I are getting all new neighbors. Everybody that lives around us has moved, and we're getting new ones coming in. We've had conversations about, these new people coming in, what do we want to do to begin to develop a relationship with them that we didn't have with the ones that left? We need to be good neighbors. You know the lesson. It's there. It's yours. You know the golden rule you have for a long time. But it's such a heady point in the middle of such a great sermon. Felt like it was worth our time. We're going to sing a song as a means of encouragement. I would say that you need to pray for me. I need to practice this rule more. I need to be more consistent with it. That's what I'm going to be praying to God to help me to do. If there's something you need to do, if there's something that we can help you with, we invite you to come down. If not, maybe it's something you just need to take a few minutes and have a little talk with Jesus. That's just not right. Have a little talk with God through Jesus. And ask Him to empower you to use this rule as the guiding point in your life. If there's anything we can do, please come right now while we stand and as we sing this song.